Alright, settle in, get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights a little. We're about to embark on a journey, not through time in a grand, rushing river, but more like a quiet drift down a sleepy canal, where every ripple has a story. Tonight, we're not just looking at history. We're listening to its whispers, the ones that often get drowned out by the shouts. History, you see, is a bit like a dusty old attic. You go in, you rummage around, and sometimes you find something truly incredible. A forgotten diary, a strange invention, a treasure chest from another era. And when you find it, there's this incredible rush. The heart beats a little faster. The mind starts to spin with possibilities. What did it mean? Who did it belong to? What secrets does it hold? Now, usually when we talk about history, we're focused on those amazing discoveries. The ancient cities brought back from the sand, the majestic tombs opened for the first time in millennia, the artifacts that tell us about lives long past. And rightly so, these moments are extraordinary. They're the eureka, moments of human curiosity, shining lights into the forgotten corners of our past. But here's the thing about those lights. Sometimes they cast really long, dramatic shadows. Shadows that can twist and warp the truth a little. Because while the real discoveries are often painstaking, methodical, and frankly, a bit dusty and slow, the human imagination. Oh, that's a speedy, dramatic thing. It loves a good story. And sometimes it loves a good story a little too much, even if it has to invent bits of it. That's what we're exploring tonight. The fascinating, sometimes hilarious, sometimes a little sad, dance between what archaeologists actually find and what the rest of us want them to find. It's about how a quiet whisper from the past can turn into a full-blown scream of sensation, with curses, ancient magic, and dramatic theories taking center stage. We're going to try and separate the genuine awe of discovery from the glittering, often misleading tinsel of sensationalism. Think of it like this. An archaeologist uncovers a really old pot. They study its clay, its design, where it was found. They learn about ancient pottery techniques, trade routes, maybe even what people ate from it. That's the real discovery, rich, complex, fascinating. But then, a newspaper might write, "Mysterious pot uncovered, possibly held alien elixir." See the difference? One is careful, the other is, well, definitely not boring. And there's nothing wrong with being excited. History is exciting. But sometimes that excitement gets a little carried away, like a toddler on a sugar rush who suddenly thinks they can fly. We, as humans, are programmed for stories, for drama, for the extraordinary. And when faced with something truly ancient and mysterious, our brains often fill in the blanks with the most thrilling possibilities, even if those possibilities are pure fantasy. For thousands of years, ancient cultures have buried their dead, built their monuments, and left behind traces of their lives. And for just as long, we've been digging them up. Sometimes it's for knowledge, sometimes it's for loot, and sometimes it's just because we're endlessly curious creatures, poking around in the dirt, wondering what happened before us. But it was in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that archaeology really exploded into the public consciousness. Suddenly, the secrets of long-lost civilizations weren't just for dusty academics. They were front-page news. Giant pyramids, forgotten cities, incredible treasures. It was all being uncovered, piece by painstaking piece. And the public, who had grown up on tales of adventure and exotic lands, ate it up like a delicious historical cake. This period was a whirlwind of discovery, exploration, and, let's be honest, a fair bit of wild speculation. Every new find was a chance for a new theory, a new headline, and a new wave of public fascination. It was like the internet, but with telegrams and newsprint instead of memes and viral videos. The thirst for the extraordinary was almost unquenchable. And in this heady atmosphere, where serious scholars rubbed shoulders with amateur enthusiasts and sensation-hungry journalists, one discovery stood out above all others. A discovery that perfectly, exquisitely, embodies this tug-of-war between meticulous science and rampant storytelling. A discovery that gave us not just an unparalleled glimpse into ancient life, but also gave birth to one of the most enduring, thrilling, and utterly baseless myths of the modern age. I'm talking, of course, about the tomb of a forgotten boy king, a pharaoh barely remembered until a tenacious archaeologist dedicated his life to finding him. A tomb found almost by chance, nestled in the desolate, sun-baked heart of Egypt's Valley of the Kings. And when that tomb was opened, it unleashed not just ancient treasures, but also a terrifying, fantastical tale that captivated the world, the legend of the Curse of the Pharaohs. Tonight, we're going to dive deep into that story. We're going to meet the people involved, understand the world they lived in, and carefully, gently separate the gold of genuine archaeological wonder from the glittery, but ultimately hollow foil of sensationalism. We'll look at the facts, the whispers, and the outright fabrications that turned a breathtaking discovery into a global phenomenon of fear and fascination. So take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin our quiet journey into the past, into the heart of a story that's far more amazing when you know the truth. All right, let's rewind the clock a little, shall we? Imagine Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It's a time when steam trains are puffing across continents, electric lights are starting to flicker in city streets, and people are absolutely mad for anything, well, exotic. And nothing, and I mean nothing, was quite as exotic and mysterious as ancient Egypt. This wasn't just a passing fad. It was a full-blown obsession. We're talking Egyptomania. Think of it like today's craze for superhero movies, but instead of capes and superpowers, people were gaga for sarcophagi, hieroglyphs, and mummies. Imagine going to a fancy dress party and everyone's showing up as Cleopatra or a pharaoh. Okay, maybe not everyone, but you get the idea. It was in the air, in the art, in the fashion, and definitely in the newspapers. Why such a huge fuss about a civilization that had been gone for thousands of years? Well, part of it was Napoleon. Good old Napoleon Bonaparte, who, when he invaded Egypt in 1798, didn't just bring soldiers, he brought scientists, artists, and scholars. These folks started documenting everything, and when they came back to France, they brought with them incredible sketches, detailed maps, and tantalizing tales of colossal ruins and sand-buried cities. It was like they'd pulled back a curtain on a secret world, and Europe gasped. Then came the really big game-changer, the Rosetta Stone. Found in 1799, this slab of rock with the same text written in 3 different scripts, one of them being hieroglyphs, was finally deciphered in the 1820s. Suddenly, those mysterious squiggles on temple walls weren't just pretty pictures anymore. They were a language that told stories, recorded history, and revealed the inner thoughts of pharaohs and priests. It was like suddenly being able to read a diary that had been locked for 2,000 years. Imagine the excitement, the possibilities. After that, the floodgates opened. People flocked to Egypt. Some were serious scholars, keen to understand this ancient world. Others were simply rich tourists, eager to buy souvenirs, sometimes by just chipping off pieces of ancient temples, which, let's be clear, is a huge no-no now, but was a bit more common back then, regrettably. And then there were the archaeologists of the day. I put that in quotes because, well, the rules were a little looser back then. For many, archaeology wasn't quite the careful, scientific discipline we know today. It was more like an intellectual treasure hunt. You went to Egypt, you found a promising spot, and you started digging. The goal was often to find impressive artifacts, huge statues, or glittering gold to send back to museums or private collections in Europe. There wasn't always the same emphasis on careful documentation, context, or leaving things in situ, which means leaving them where they were found until they can be properly recorded. Sometimes it was about getting the biggest, shiniest thing first. This isn't to say there weren't brilliant, dedicated people working in Egypt. There absolutely were. But the overall atmosphere was one of competitive excitement. Discoveries were made, yes, but sometimes at the cost of less glamorous, but equally important, historical information being lost or overlooked. It was a bit like a gold rush, but instead of gold nuggets, people were digging for ancient wonders. And the Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs had been buried for centuries, was the ultimate prize. Imagine the scene. The scorching sun, the endless sand, the incredible scale of the ancient monuments. It must have felt like stepping into a storybook. Every mound of sand could hide a secret. Every carved stone could be a clue. And with each new find, a colossal statue unearthed, A new tomb entrance revealed. A papyrus scroll translated. The public's hunger for more only grew. Newspapers, of course, absolutely loved this stuff. Ancient queen's jewels found. Pharaoh's mummy uncovered. These weren't just news items. They were epic tales unfolding in real time. They sparked the imagination, made people dream of far-off lands, and fed into a romanticized view of archaeology as a thrilling adventure, full of daring explorers and mysterious curses. Yes, even then, the idea of curses was floating around, though not nearly as famous as the one we'll talk about later. In this buzzing, competitive, and highly romanticized world, enters our hero for tonight's story, Howard Carter. He wasn't some dashing, swashbuckling adventurer in a fedora, though he did spend a lot of time in dusty places. He was a British archaeologist, though he started as an artist, funnily enough, who would become one of the most famous names in the history books. But he entered a field where the lines between careful science and sensationalism were often blurry, and where patience was sometimes in short supply. Carter was different, though. While others might have been caught up in the race for big finds, he had a different approach. He was meticulous, observant, and incredibly patient. He knew that the desert held many more secrets than had already been revealed, and he was willing to wait and to look in places others had given up on. He understood that the real treasures weren't just about gold and jewels, but about the stories they told, the context they provided, and the silent voices they gave back to a long-lost civilization. He was a man who understood the whispers, even when everyone else was shouting. And it was this quiet dedication, this almost obsessive patience, that would eventually lead him to one of the most astonishing discoveries in human history. A discovery that would, ironically, also ignite the greatest blaze of sensationalism the archaeological world had ever seen. But before we get there, we need to understand a bit more about the man himself and his unyielding quest. He wasn't just digging for artifacts. He was digging for answers, one careful brushstroke at a time. So, into this world of Egyptomania, big digs, and even bigger newspaper headlines, steps a man named Howard Carter. Now, if you're picturing Indiana Jones, maybe swap the whip for a paintbrush and the daring escapes for long hours hunched over ancient walls in the scorching sun. Because Carter wasn't your typical dashing adventurer. He was, if we're being honest, a bit of an introvert, a quiet, intense fellow with a deep passion for detail. Born in 1874 in London, Carter actually started out as an artist. And a pretty talented one at that. At just 17, he got his first gig in Egypt. Not as a lead archaeologist, mind you, but as a draftsman, which basically means he drew all the amazing stuff others found. He was tasked with copying hieroglyphs and tomb paintings perfectly accurately. Imagine sitting for hours in a dimly lit, dusty tomb, carefully tracing every line of an ancient drawing. That takes a special kind of patience, doesn't it? It's not exactly glamorous, but it teaches you to see, to really observe every tiny detail that others might miss. And that's exactly what Carter did. He spent years working on various digs, absorbing everything. He wasn't just drawing. He was learning about Egyptian art, architecture, and beliefs. He was understanding the very fabric of this ancient culture. He wasn't just looking for treasure. He was searching for understanding. He even became quite good at deciphering hieroglyphs himself. This wasn't a job for him. It was an absolute obsession, a quiet, burning fire within him. By the turn of the 20th century, Carter was becoming quite respected in the Egyptology world. He even got a fancy title for a while, Chief Inspector of Antiquities for Upper Egypt. This was a big deal. It meant he was in charge of protecting and managing many of Egypt's incredible sites. He was responsible for making sure things were dug up properly, and that precious artifacts weren't just pilfered away. He was a stickler for rules, for careful method, and for proper documentation. You could say he was the archaeological equivalent of a very neat librarian. But Carter wasn't content just managing sites. He wanted to make his own big discovery, and he had a hunch. A really big hunch, actually. Most of the famous pharaohs had been found in the Valley of the Kings, a desolate, rocky valley on the west bank of the Nile. For centuries, people had been digging there. Tombs had been plundered in ancient times, and more recently, archaeologists had gone over it with a fine-tooth comb. Many people, especially by the early 1900s, believed the Valley of the Kings was worked out. Empty. There was nothing left to find. "Move along, folks, nothing to see here," they basically said. But Carter disagreed. Deeply. He had this nagging feeling, this conviction that there was one major pharaoh still missing. A pharaoh from a turbulent but important period of Egyptian history. A young pharaoh whose tomb had never been officially discovered. His name? Tutankhamun. Now, Tutankhamun wasn't a big-shot pharaoh like Ramses the Great. He was a pretty minor king, remembered mostly because of his father, Akhenaten, who tried to change Egypt's religion in a wild, controversial way. Tutankhamun came after him and tried to set things back to normal. He died young, and for centuries his name was almost lost to history. But Carter had found clues, small artifacts, fragments of pottery, bits of evidence that suggested a tomb for this forgotten king must exist in the valley. It was a crazy idea. Everyone else had moved on. The valley was supposed to be barren. But Carter was stubborn, patient, and perhaps a little bit mad in the best possible way. He believed in his hunch with every fiber of his being. The problem, of course, was that digging in Egypt is expensive. Very, very expensive. You need equipment, workers, supplies, permits. It's not just a shovel and a picnic basket. That's where the second key player in our story comes in, Lord Carnarvon. George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was a wealthy British aristocrat. He was an amateur Egyptologist himself, often spending winters in Egypt, digging for artifacts. He was also a bit of a character, charming, well-connected, and with pockets deep enough to fund an ambitious archaeological project. After a driving accident left him with health problems, the warm Egyptian climate became his annual refuge, and digging for ancient treasures became his passion. Carnarvon had hired Carter to direct his excavations back in 1907. It was a perfect match, in a way. Carnarvon had the money and the connections. Carter had the expertise, the meticulousness, and the single-minded vision. For years, they worked together, making some interesting finds, but nothing that made global headlines. Carter, however, never gave up on his dream of finding Tutankhamun. He kept returning to the same small, overlooked sections of the valley year after year, with a dogged determination that would make a bloodhound blush. This wasn't glamorous work. It was hot, dusty, back-breaking labor, often yielding nothing but disappointment. Imagine digging in the same spot, day after day, week after week, for years, with everyone telling you it's pointless. Most people would have thrown in the towel and gone home to a nice cup of tea. But Carter, he believed. He had an almost mystical connection to the land and its ancient secrets. He wasn't just looking for a tomb. He was looking for the tomb, the one everyone else had missed. He was obsessed, not with fame or fortune, but with the quiet satisfaction of unlocking a forgotten piece of history. And that patient, almost stubborn obsession would soon lead him to something truly extraordinary. Something that would change Egyptology forever and ignite a firestorm of global fascination and, yes, sensationalism. But first, he had to get one last shot. Alright, so we've got Howard Carter, our dedicated, slightly stubborn archaeologist, convinced that Tutankhamun's tomb is still out there, hiding in plain sight in the empty Valley of the Kings. And we've got Lord Carnarvon, his generous patron, who's been funding this quest for years. But even unlimited wealth has its limits, especially when the main result has been, well, a lot of sand and not a lot of pharaohs. By 1922, Lord Carnarvon was starting to get a little antsy. And honestly, who could blame him? He'd poured a significant amount of his fortune into Carter's search for Tutankhamun, season after season, year after year. It was like betting on a horse that kept coming in last. But the jockey kept saying, "Just one more race? I feel it." Carnarvon, being a pragmatic man, was looking at his ledger and seeing a lot of expenses and not a lot of glittering returns. So, he basically gave Carter an ultimatum. "This is it, old boy. One more season. If you don't find anything significant this time, we're calling it quits. My wallet needs a rest, and my patience is wearing thin." Imagine the pressure. This wasn't just about finding a tomb anymore. It was about validating years of relentless effort, proving his lifelong hunch wasn't just a fantasy. and securing his legacy in the world of Egyptology. Carter knew this was his last, best chance. So, in late 1922, Carter returned to the Valley of the Kings for what he knew could be his final season. The air must have been thick with unspoken tension. He revisited the area where he'd found those tantalizing clues, small artifacts with Tutankhamun's name. This was a spot just below the tomb of Ramesses VI, right where the ancient workmen's huts had once stood. Most people would have dismissed this area. Why would a king's tomb be buried under common workmen's dwellings? It seemed illogical, but Carter had a different thought. Perhaps the huts were built after the tomb was sealed, effectively hiding it from future tomb robbers. It was a long shot, but sometimes the best discoveries are found in the most unlikely places. He started digging, not in a grand sweeping gesture, but with his typical methodical approach. He began clearing the debris from around the huts, a seemingly unglamorous task. Days turned into weeks. The desert sun beat down. The workers toiled, patiently sifting through rubble. It was the archaeological equivalent of watching paint dry, for days on end, under a searing sun. No drama, no trumpets, just dust and sweat. Then, on November 4th, 1922, something changed. One of the water boy, a young lad whose job it was to ferry water to the workers, stumbled. Not over a rock, not over a camel, but over a stone. A stone that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. And when they cleared away a little more sand, they found it wasn't just one stone. It was the top of a flight of steps carved into the bedrock. A flight of steps leading down. Silence fell over the dig site. The workers, who had been chatting and clanging, stopped dead. Carter himself must have felt a jolt go through him. Steps like these could only mean one thing: a tomb. After all these years, after all the doubt, after everyone said the valley was empty, he had found something. His hunch, his patient obsession, was about to pay off. Carefully, meticulously, they cleared the sand from around the steps. Down they went, 12 of them, until they reached a sealed doorway. And on that doorway, clear as day, were the faint impressions of royal seals. The seal of the royal necropolis, the cemetery, and, thrillingly, the seal of Tutankhamun himself. This wasn't just a tomb. This was his tomb, the one he had searched for so long. Now, you might think Carter would burst through that door, yelling "Eureka!" and throwing his hat in the air. But remember, this is Howard Carter. He was meticulous, patient, and above all, disciplined. He knew the world would want to know about this. He knew the treasures inside, if any, would be incredibly fragile. He couldn't just barge in. First, he had to secure the site, protecting it from any curious onlookers or, worse, potential thieves. Then, he had to do the proper thing: inform his patron, Lord Carnarvon. Carnarvon, at this time, was back in England, recovering from an illness. So Carter sent him a telegram. A very famous telegram, actually. It read, in short, "Have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations. Recovered same for your arrival." Think about that. He found the sealed entrance to what he knew was a royal tomb, potentially untouched for over 3,000 years, and then he reburied it with sand, just so Carnarvon could be there for the grand unveiling. That's some serious self-control and also a deep respect for his patron. It was a gamble, leaving it hidden like that, but Carter was confident in his security measures. Carnarvon, of course, dropped everything. He and his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, immediately set sail for Egypt. The news, though not fully public yet, started to buzz through archaeological circles. Whispers turned into excited murmurs. Something big was happening in the Valley of the Kings. Something that promised to rewrite history. The anticipation during those few weeks must have been unbearable. For Carter, it was the culmination of a lifetime's work, a quiet triumph finally within reach. For Carnarvon, it was the vindication of his long-held trust and investment. And for the world, though they didn't quite know it yet, a door was about to open onto a forgotten world, unleashing not only unimaginable beauty and historical insight, but also a storm of sensationalism that would forever link the name Tutankhamun with mystery and a terrifying, albeit fictional, curse. The stage was set. The waiting was almost over, and soon they would step into the silence of millennia. Okay, the suspense is almost unbearable, isn't it? Lord Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn, have finally arrived in Egypt. Howard Carter, our patient hero, has been waiting, probably pacing, for weeks. The sealed doorway to Tutankhamun's tomb, reburied for safekeeping, is once again revealed. The air is thick with anticipation and a healthy dose of dust, naturally. It's November 26, 1922. The small group stands before the sealed door. Carter, Carnarvon, Lady Evelyn, and a few key members of the excavation team. Imagine the silence. This isn't just opening a door. It's opening a portal to 3,000 years ago. Every breath must have felt heavy. Carter, ever the professional, made a small breach in the upper left corner of the doorway. He used a chisel gently, carefully. He was trying to get a peek, just a tiny look, to see what they were dealing with. He held a candle, probably a sputtering, smoky thing, up to the hole and peered inside. The air inside must have been stale, still, undisturbed for millennia. What did he see? What did he feel? This is one of those legendary moments in history, and the way Carter described it is perfect. Lord Carnarvon, impatient, excited, and probably bouncing on the balls of his feet like a kid on Christmas morning, couldn't take it anymore. After what must have felt like an eternity, he blurted out, "Can you see anything?" And Carter, after a moment of stunned silence, turned, his face probably pale with awe, and uttered the famous, understated reply, "Yes, wonderful things, wonderful things." Just 2 words, but they conveyed everything. It wasn't just a tomb. It was filled, and not just filled with rubble, but with, well, wonderful things. They carefully enlarged the hole. And now, not just Carter, but Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn could peer inside. What they saw in the flickering candlelight must have been truly breathtaking. It wasn't an empty chamber. It was crammed, piled high, with an astonishing array of objects. Imagine walking into a room that's been sealed for 3,000 years. The air is still, the dust is thick, and then, as your eyes adjust to the dim light, you start to make out shapes. Golden couches shaped like strange, mythical beasts, elaborately carved wooden chests, a stack of gleaming chariots, their gold leaf still shimmering, statues of black-lacquered guardians, their faces serene and watchful, standing guard over another sealed doorway, hinting at even more secrets beyond. This first chamber, what would later be called the antechamber, was a scene of controlled chaos, a storage room for Tutankhamun's journey to the afterlife. There were alabaster vases, ceremonial beds, stools, jewelry boxes, even provisions for the journey. It was a kaleidoscope of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship, preserved almost perfectly. It was less like a tomb and more like a carefully packed moving van for the afterlife, filled with everything a young pharaoh might need. Lady Evelyn later described it as feeling like she was walking into a dream. And who wouldn't? This wasn't just an old vase here or a broken statue there. This was a complete snapshot of a forgotten era, a time capsule untouched by human hands since ancient priests sealed it shut. It was as if time itself had paused in that room. The emotional impact on Carter and Carnarvon must have been immense. Years of fruitless searching, of battling skepticism and financial strain, all culminated in this one incredible, silent moment. They hadn't just found a tomb. They had found the tomb, largely intact, bursting with the material culture of a lost king. It was proof that Carter's stubborn hunch was right, that the empty valley still held its deepest secrets. News of the discovery, once Carnarvon officially confirmed it, spread like wildfire. But not just through the dry academic journals. Oh no, this hit the front pages of newspapers around the world. King Tut's tomb found. Untouched treasures. Archaeologists find wonderful things. The sheer scale of the discovery was unlike anything seen before. Earlier Egyptian finds had yielded incredible artifacts, but never an almost entirely intact royal tomb, especially one so richly furnished. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a phenomenon. People who had never cared a jot about archaeology were suddenly obsessed with King Tut. Imagine the dinner table conversations in London, Paris, and New York. Did you hear about the pharaoh's tomb? All that gold. Can you believe it's been down there all this time? The world held its breath, eager for every single detail, every new revelation. This was pure, unadulterated discovery, undimmed by any shadows of sensationalism just yet. It was simply a wonder. For a brief, shining moment, the world united in awe of human history and ingenuity. There were no curses, no scary warnings, just the overwhelming excitement of peeking into a past that had been silent for so long. It was the thrill of exploration, the triumph of perseverance, and the sheer beauty of ancient art, all rolled into one incredible, wonderful discovery. But as we know, such pure moments of wonder rarely last. The human mind, ever eager for drama, was already preparing to add its own colorful and ultimately fictional footnotes to this incredible story. The treasures were safe, for now, but the quiet truth of their discovery was about to face a much noisier challenge. So the world knows. Howard Carter has uttered those famous words, "Wonderful things," and everyone, absolutely everyone, is buzzing about Tutankhamun's tomb. Now, if you thought finding the tomb was the hard part, think again. The real headache and the real test of Carter's meticulous nature was just beginning. This wasn't just a quick peek and a grab and go. This was serious, scientific archaeology, on a scale never before attempted, and under the blazing spotlight of global media. Imagine you've just found the most incredible treasure chest in history. Your first instinct might be to rip it open, grab handfuls of gold, and shout, "Look what I found!" But Carter wasn't about that life. He was about method. He understood that these objects, some of them thousands of years old and incredibly fragile, needed to be handled with the utmost care. He wasn't just collecting pretty things. He was preserving history, piece by painstaking piece. His approach was revolutionary for its time. Instead of just pulling things out, Carter insisted on a rigorous process. Every single object had to be cataloged. We're talking detailed descriptions, where it was found in the room, what condition it was in. Then it had to be photographed from multiple angles. Imagine taking thousands of photos with old, bulky cameras, under difficult lighting, in a dusty tomb. It was a massive undertaking. After documentation came preservation. Many objects, especially those made of wood, linen, or gilded gesso, a kind of plaster, were incredibly delicate after 3 millennia. They couldn't just be picked up. Carter and his team, which included experts like Arthur Mace from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and chemist Alfred Lucas, had to stabilize these artifacts on site. Sometimes, this meant carefully painting on a layer of paraffin wax or cellulose to hold crumbling wood together, or gently wrapping textiles. It was like archaeological surgery, performed in a cave by candlelight in stifling heat. And then, finally, the removal. Each object had to be carefully packed, often in custom-made crates filled with cotton wool or other soft materials, and then transported, usually by donkey or camel, to a nearby laboratory, which was basically a makeshift shed, for further treatment, before eventually making its way down the Nile to Cairo. This was a logistical nightmare on a grand scale. We're talking thousands upon thousands of objects. Took years to clear the tomb, not days or weeks. This slow, methodical process, while absolutely crucial for preserving the tomb's contents, was a nightmare for the hungry media. They wanted action. They wanted daily updates. They wanted glittering gold and shocking revelations. Instead, they got reports of careful documentation and delicate preservation. It was about as exciting as watching paint dry, if the paint was 3,000 years old and had to be delicately stabilized with special chemicals. Journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers descended on the Valley of the Kings like a flock of very persistent, very noisy vultures. Carter quickly found himself overwhelmed. He was a quiet, introverted man who just wanted to get on with his work, but suddenly he was the most famous archaeologist in the world. He tried to manage the influx, issuing strict rules, limiting access, and trying to control the flow of information. He even struck a deal with the Times newspaper of London for exclusive rights to the story, hoping to bring some order to the chaos. This move, while understandable from Carter's perspective, He wanted to fund the ongoing work and have some control over the narrative. Actually backfired a bit. It alienated other journalists who felt cut out. They retaliated by printing less reliable stories, relying on rumors, half-truths, and outright speculation. If they couldn't get the real story, they'd just make a better, more dramatic one up. And the public, hungry for more, happily devoured it all. This created a massive tension. On one side, you had Carter and his team painstakingly, scientifically trying to uncover and preserve an unprecedented historical find. They were worried about humidity, crumbling wood, and proper cataloging. On the other side, you had a global audience and a press corps desperate for scandal, drama, and instant gratification. They were worried about deadlines, readership numbers, and sales. It was a clash of cultures, of priorities, and of patience levels. It's here that the first little seeds of sensationalism, beyond just the excitement of discovery, really began to take root. The slow pace, the limited access, the lack of immediate, flashy news, it all created a void. And the human imagination, when faced with a void, loves to fill it. Especially when it comes to ancient Egypt, a land already brimming with myths and legends. The idea of a curse protecting a pharaoh's tomb wasn't entirely new. There were indeed ancient inscriptions warning against disturbing the dead, but these were largely symbolic, not magical threats of instant doom. But the combination of ancient mysteries, intense public interest, and a frustrated, imaginative press created the perfect storm for something new to emerge. As Carter and his team carefully, slowly, removed the wondrous objects from the antechamber, then later the burial chamber itself, they were doing groundbreaking work. They were writing a new chapter in history, not with dramatic flourishes, but with careful notes, precise measurements, and diligent preservation. They were giving us a real, tangible connection to a boy king who lived thousands of years ago. But outside the tomb, in the bustling world of Cairo and beyond, a different story was beginning to brew. A story whispered in hushed tones, fueled by speculation and superstition. A story that would soon overshadow the incredible archaeological achievement and seize the public's imagination far more powerfully than any scientific report ever could. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, metaphorically speaking, and the first real piece of news that would spark the curse legend was about to strike. So, the methodical work is underway in the tomb, right? Carter and his team are carefully documenting every single wonderful thing. The press is getting impatient. The public is hungry for more drama than careful cataloging can provide. It's like waiting for a huge blockbuster movie, and all you're getting are behind-the-scenes documentaries about the catering. Something had to give, and something did. Remember Lord Carnarvon? Carter's patron, the man with the deep pockets and a shared passion for Egypt? He was instrumental in making the discovery happen. He was there with Lady Evelyn for that incredible first glimpse into the antechamber. He experienced the initial awe and shared in the triumph. But alas, Lord Carnarvon had a bit of a history of bad luck when it came to his health. He wasn't exactly a picture of robust health, having suffered a serious motor accident years earlier that left him with lingering respiratory issues. The Egyptian climate often helped him, but he wasn't invincible. Now, imagine the setting: Cairo, March 1923. It's a busy, bustling city, full of life, and unfortunately, full of mosquitoes. One evening, Lord Carnarvon was shaving. He nicked himself. A common enough occurrence, right? But then, a mosquito, perhaps drawn by the scent of blood or simply looking for a snack, landed on that fresh cut and bit him. This bite, on a man whose immune system was likely already compromised, led to an infection. It developed into erysipelas, a nasty bacterial skin infection, and then spiraled into pneumonia. This was serious. In the early 20th century, before antibiotics were widely available, infections like this could be incredibly dangerous. Carnarvon's condition worsened. Despite the best efforts of doctors and the frantic prayers of his family, Lord Carnarvon died in Cairo on April 5, 1923, at the age of 56. Now pause here. A wealthy, middle-aged man with a history of health problems dies from an infection after a mosquito bite. Sad? Yes. Tragic? Absolutely. Supernatural? Well, that's where the story takes a sharp, dramatic turn. Because in the world of hungry journalists, frustrated by Carter's exclusive deal with the Times, this wasn't just a man dying. Oh no, this was news. Big news. And it wasn't long before the headlines began to scream, not about illness, but about something far more thrilling. Pharaoh's curse strikes. The papers went wild. They started connecting Carnarvon's death directly to his involvement in opening Tutankhamun's tomb. Suddenly, the fact that he was already a bit frail, or that mosquito-borne infections were a common problem in Egypt, completely disappeared. It was far more exciting to suggest that the spirit of an ancient king had reached out from the grave to claim its revenge. And then came the coincidences. Oh, the delicious coincidences. The most famous one. The story that at the exact moment Lord Carnarvon died in Cairo, all the lights in the city flickered and went out. A sudden, unexplained blackout, perfectly timed with the pharaoh's vengeful strike. How dramatic! Of course, Cairo in 1923 probably had its fair share of power outages, and pinpointing the exact moment of death and an unrelated power flicker is a bit of a stretch, but why let facts get in the way of a good story? Another popular tale was about Carnarvon's dog, Susie. Back in England, at the exact moment of her master's death, Susie supposedly let out a mournful howl and then dropped dead herself. Now, this is a truly heartbreaking image. The loyal dog succumbing to a supernatural grief. Again, lovely story, but there's no real evidence for it. And even if Susie did die around that time, it's far more likely to be old age or a common ailment than a magical telepathic curse. These stories, along with others, were seized upon by the press and sensationalized to an incredible degree. It wasn't just one newspaper. It was many vying for sales, trying to outdo each other with ever more dramatic tales. The Curse of Tutankhamun was born, and it spread like wildfire across the globe. Why did this catch on so quickly? Well, remember our discussion about Egyptomania? People were already primed for mystery and exoticism. They were fascinated by ancient magic and the supernatural. The idea of a curse protecting a pharaoh's tomb resonated with popular fiction of the time. Think about it. A forbidden treasure, a sacred place disturbed, and then a mysterious, deadly revenge. This perfect blockbuster material, even if it's utterly untrue. It gave a powerful, tangible, and terrifying explanation for something that was, in reality, a rather mundane tragedy. A man dying from an infection. It turned a medical event into a divine, or rather undead, intervention. It also tapped into a bit of guilt. Were these Western archaeologists disrespecting ancient cultures by digging up their dead? The curse offered a moralizing tale, a warning. Even Lord Carnarvon's personal physician, Dr. Alan Gardner, unintentionally fed the beast a little. He mentioned that an ancient inscription warning against disturbing the tomb might have existed. While he probably meant it academically, the press took it and ran, reporting it as definitive proof of a magical warning. So, in the midst of one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made, a tragedy struck. But instead of being remembered as a sad footnote, Lord Carnarvon's death became the absolute cornerstone of a massive, globally viral sensationalist narrative. The whispers of the past turned into shouts, not of history, but of horror. The quiet, scientific endeavor of Howard Carter was suddenly overshadowed by a terrifying tale that would captivate the world's imagination for decades to come, proving that sometimes a good story, even a made-up one, is far more powerful than the truth. And unfortunately for Carter, this was just the beginning of the curse's grip on the public mind. So, Lord Carnarvon has passed away, and the newspapers have practically drawn a chalk outline around his body, pointing dramatically at Tutankhamun's tomb as the culprit. The Curse of the Pharaohs is officially a global sensation. But how did this idea get so much traction? How did it go from just newspaper hype to something many people genuinely believed? Well, part of the answer lies with a very famous writer, a man known for his incredible logic who, ironically, played a huge role in boosting the supernatural side of things, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, you probably know Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as the brilliant mind behind Sherlock Holmes. The master detective, a man of cold, hard facts, deduction, and logic, who always found rational explanations for seemingly impossible mysteries. So, it feels a little, well, ironic to find his name linked to a spooky curse, doesn't it? It's like finding out your super logical math teacher secretly believes in Bigfoot. But here's the thing. While he created Sherlock, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself was deeply invested in spiritualism. This was a belief system popular at the time, especially after the First World War, when millions of people were grieving lost loved ones and desperately seeking comfort or connection to the afterlife. Spiritualism involved believing that the spirits of the dead could communicate with the living, often through mediums or seances. Doyle became one of its most prominent and vocal champions. He genuinely believed in ghosts, fairies, and all sorts of unseen forces. So, when Lord Carnarvon died, and the Pharaoh's curse story started swirling, Doyle wasn't just a casual observer. He weighed in, and when he weighed in, people listened. This wasn't some unknown journalist writing sensational headlines. This was the celebrated author of Sherlock Holmes. If he thought there was something to it, then maybe, just maybe, it was true. Doyle publicly suggested that Carnarvon's death was not a coincidence, but a deliberate act. He theorized that ancient Egyptians knew how to create powerful elementals or spirit guardians to protect their sacred spaces. These weren't curses in the traditional sense, he argued, but rather spiritual entities that would act to defend the tombs of the pharaohs from intruders. In his view, these invisible guardians were essentially ancient booby traps, not of stone or poison, but of pure, vengeful spirit. Imagine the impact of this statement. It wasn't just a spooky tale anymore. It had the intellectual weight of a famous author, albeit one with a very particular set of beliefs. Doyle essentially gave the curse a pseudoscientific, spiritual explanation. He made it sound plausible, even logical, within his own framework of belief. He moved it from mere superstition to something that serious people, like himself, could consider a genuine phenomenon. The media, of course, absolutely loved this. It was like Christmas, New Year's, and your birthday all rolled into one for headline writers. Now they had a celebrity endorsement for their sensational stories. Sherlock Holmes' creator says curse is real. Doyle believes ancient spirits guard tomb. This added a whole new layer of credibility and intrigue to the burgeoning legend. If the man who invented the most logical detective in fiction believed in tomb guardians, then who were we to doubt? It tapped into a broader cultural fascination with the supernatural that was prevalent in the early 20th century. People were already reading ghost stories, attending seances, and discussing psychic phenomena. The Curse of Tutankhamun, backed by a respected public figure like Doyle, fit perfectly into this cultural landscape. It became more than just a newspaper story. It became part of the public consciousness, a modern myth. It's a fascinating example of how a famous person's beliefs, even if not universally accepted, can powerfully influence public perception. Doyle wasn't trying to trick anyone. He genuinely believed in what he was saying, but his fame and authority inadvertently lent immense weight to a story that was, at its heart, completely unsubstantiated. So the stage was set. You had the incredible, awe-inspiring discovery of a pristine ancient tomb. You had the tragic death of the patron, Lord Carnarvon. You had the desperate, sensationalist press inventing dramatic coincidences. And then, you had one of the most famous authors in the world stepping in to say, actually, yes, I think there's something genuinely supernatural going on here. It was the perfect recipe for a legend. This wasn't just about a few curious people being scared. The Curse of the Pharaohs became a genuine cultural phenomenon, discussed in drawing rooms, whispered in cafes, and debated in academic circles. It put Tutankhamun on the map, not just as an archaeological wonder, but as a source of potent, ancient magic and danger. And poor Howard Carter, our patient, meticulous archaeologist, he must have been tearing his hair out. Here he was, trying to carefully document every bead and buckle, trying to preserve delicate artifacts from thousands of years ago, and the whole world was obsessed with spectral guardians and mysterious deaths. He wanted to talk about historical context and artistic beauty, and everyone else wanted to talk about ghosts. It was a classic case of the quiet truth being completely drowned out by the thunderous roar of sensationalism, boosted by an unlikely and very famous voice from the world of fiction. And unfortunately for Carter, the curse was only just getting started. It was about to claim more victims, or so the papers would have you believe. Alright, so the Curse of Tutankhamun is now a full-blown global sensation, thanks in no small part to newspapers needing exciting headlines and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's theories about spirit guardians. Lord Carnarvon's death kicked it all off, but a good curse, like a good horror movie, needs a body count to really keep people on the edge of their seats. And so, over the next few years, a string of deaths connected, however loosely, to the tomb's discovery began to be attributed to the vengeful pharaoh. Let's grab our magnifying glass, channel our inner Sherlock, the logical one, not the spiritualist one, and take a look at some of these alleged victims. Because when you actually examine the list, it gets, well, a little less spooky and a lot more, oh, right, that's just how life works. One of the first names often mentioned after Carnarvon was George J. Gould, a very wealthy American financier who visited the tomb shortly after its opening. He died in May 1923, just a month after Carnarvon. Dramatic, right? A second victim. Except Gould was 64 years old and had been suffering from a prolonged illness, specifically pneumonia, which he contracted before his visit to Egypt. He was a sick man who traveled, got sicker, and died. Sad, but hardly supernatural. Next up, A.C. Mace. Arthur C. Mace was a close colleague of Howard Carter and a member of the excavation team from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He played a crucial role in conserving many of the tomb's delicate artifacts. He died in 1928, 5 years after the tomb's opening. Aha! Cried the newspapers. Another one claimed by the curse. But Mace died after a long battle with pleurisy and pneumonia, illnesses he'd been fighting for years. He was 54. Again, a life cut short by illness, not a pharaoh's wrath. Then there was Colonel Aubrey Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother. He died in September 1923, just a few months after Carnarvon. This seemed like a particularly strong piece of evidence for the curse, given his family connection. However, Herbert had severe eye problems and blood poisoning, for which he underwent an operation. He died from complications related to that surgery. He was 47. So, another death with a clear medical explanation, completely unrelated to ancient spells. The list goes on, and if you dig into historical records, you find a pattern. There was Richard Bethel, a secretary who worked for Lord Carnarvon. He died in 1929, 6 years after the discovery. His death was attributed to natural causes, possibly heart failure, though some sensational reports claimed suicide. Regardless, it was a death of an older man, well after the initial discovery. Even people who simply visited the tomb were added to the list. For example, Archibald Douglas Reed, a wealthy businessman who saw the tomb, died after suddenly falling ill. Dramatic, except he had a history of illness and was in his 60s. See a theme emerging here? The alleged victims often had pre-existing health conditions, or they died years after their brief involvement, from perfectly explainable medical issues or old age. It's like saying everyone who's ever visited a famous landmark and later died was killed by the landmark's curse. Eventually, everyone dies. This brings us to a crucial concept: the law of large numbers. Hundreds of people were involved in the discovery, excavation, and conservation of Tutankhamun's tomb, or visited it in the years following its opening. Hundreds. Over a span of several years or even decades, it is statistically inevitable that some of these people will get sick, get into accidents, or simply die of old age. That's just how life works. People don't become immortal just because they've seen a pharaoh's tomb. The key to the curse was selective reporting. Newspapers weren't printing headlines like, "Archaeologist's assistant lives long and happy life, dies at 87 from natural causes." No, they only focused on the deaths that could be sensationalized, ignoring the many, many people who were involved with the tomb and lived perfectly normal, long lives. They highlighted the dramatic few and conveniently forgot the quiet majority. It was like cherry-picking the scariest stories from a huge list of very boring ones. Imagine if every time someone who had ever worked on the Eiffel Tower construction died, we attributed it to a tower curse. You'd have a lot of victims, but zero actual curse. The same logic applies here. The sheer number of individuals connected to the Tutankhamun project made a few unfortunate deaths statistically certain, but not magically caused. The curse narrative also thrived on vagueness. What kind of curse was it? How did it work? Was it instant death or a slow wasting away? The ambiguity allowed people to project their own fears and superstitions onto the story, making it even more potent. It was a blank canvas for human anxieties. So, while the stories of the curse victims are indeed dramatic and make for compelling reading, a closer look at the actual facts reveals something far less supernatural. It reveals the natural course of life and death, exaggerated and twisted by a hungry media and a public eager for a thrilling explanation for the unexplainable. But there was one very important person involved with the tomb who remained stubbornly, annoyingly, and very inconveniently for the curse legend, alive. And he was the one who spent more time in that tomb than anyone else. We'll talk about him next. Alright, we've just debunked a whole parade of curse victims, showing how natural causes and selective reporting really did the heavy lifting there. But if this curse was truly powerful, truly ancient, truly vengeful, who should have been the first and most prominent victim? Who spent more time breathing ancient air, handling ancient objects, and generally poking around in the pharaoh's sacred resting place than anyone else? That's right, our quiet, meticulous, and incredibly stubborn hero, Howard Carter. If there was a curse that targeted those who disturbed Tutankhamun's slumber, Carter should have been a goner almost immediately. He was the one who found the tomb, who opened the seals, who peered inside, who supervised every single aspect of the excavation, day in and day out, for years. He spent more time inside that tomb, in direct contact with its contents, than any other living soul. He was, by all accounts, the chief disturber of the pharaoh's peace. So what happened to him? Well, brace yourselves for a shocking plot twist, or, just a regular plot point that completely undermines the curse theory. Howard Carter lived, and lived, and lived some more. He didn't suddenly keel over from a mysterious illness. He wasn't struck by lightning. No ancient scarab beetle flew out and bit him on the neck. He continued his painstaking work in the tomb for nearly a decade, carefully documenting, preserving, and removing every single one of the thousands of artifacts. He saw the entire process through to its conclusion, long after the initial sensationalism had begun to fade. In fact, Howard Carter lived until 1939. He died at the ripe old age of 64. And what was the cause of his death? A very common human ailment, lymphoma, a type of cancer. Sad, yes, but entirely natural. There was nothing mysterious, nothing supernatural, nothing cursed about it. He died of a disease that, sadly, many people develop. Think about that for a moment. The person most intimately involved with the tomb, the individual who spent arguably the most time within its supposedly cursed walls, lived a full life, dying more than 16 years after that fateful discovery. If the curse was real, Carter was either incredibly lucky, or the pharaoh's spiritual guardians had a really terrible aim. Or, more likely, the curse was simply a figment of human imagination and journalistic ambition. Carter himself, being a pragmatic and scientific man, was incredibly frustrated by the curse stories. He publicly dismissed them as tommirot, a lovely British phrase for nonsense. He saw them as a ridiculous distraction from the immense historical and archaeological significance of his discovery. He wanted to talk about the artistry, the craftsmanship, the insights into ancient Egyptian life and belief. Instead, he was constantly having to field questions about spectral vengeance and mysterious deaths. Imagine being an accomplished scientist and having everyone ask you if you're afraid of ghosts. It must have been infuriating. His survival, and his dismissive attitude towards the curse, should have been the nail in the coffin for the entire legend. If the main antagonist of the curse, Carter, wasn't affected, then the story unravels, right? But here's where the power of a good story, even a bad one, truly shows its strength. The public, fueled by the persistent headlines and the romantic notion of ancient retribution, largely ignored Carter's longevity. Or, if they did acknowledge it, they'd come up with convoluted explanations. Oh, maybe the curse just takes its time. Perhaps it's a slow-acting poison. He must have had a special amulet. The human mind is incredibly adept at finding ways to make a good story fit, even when the evidence is staring it in the face, politely saying, "Actually, no." This highlights an important point about sensationalism. It often thrives not on facts, but on belief and emotion. People wanted to believe in the curse. It was exciting, it was scary. It made the ancient world feel more mystical and alive. The dry facts of disease and natural causes just weren't as compelling as a vengeful pharaoh reaching from the grave. The truth, in this case, was less dramatic and therefore less popular. So, while Lord Carnarvon's untimely death provided the spark for the Curse of Tutankhamun, Howard Carter's long life and natural death were the unacknowledged rebuttal. He was the living, breathing, non-cursed proof that the pharaoh, despite his incredible treasures, was not actively seeking revenge on those who brought his story back to light. He was just a boy king, resting in peace, his tomb protected not by spells, but by layers of rock and sand. Carter's story is a testament to perseverance, meticulous scholarship, and a steadfast refusal to be swayed by popular hysteria. He cared about the truth of history, even when the world around him preferred a thrilling lie. And in the end, it was his quiet dedication, not any ancient magic, that truly won the day, allowing us to appreciate the real wonderful things that lay within Tutankhamun's tomb, rather than being distracted by the shadows of a fictional curse. His very existence was the most potent anti-curse spell imaginable. Alright, so we've established that the Curse of Tutankhamun was largely a media invention, supercharged by an imaginative public and a famous author. Lord Carnarvon died of an infection, other victims died of very explainable ailments, and Howard Carter, the main culprit in disturbing the tomb, lived a long, healthy life. Case closed, right? Well, not entirely, because even rational minds, while dismissing the supernatural, still like a good mystery. And some tried to find a scientific explanation for any potential dangers lurking in an ancient, sealed tomb. This is where things get a little less ghosts and vengeful pharaohs, and a bit more dust and microbiology. The question many people asked was, could there be something in the tomb that genuinely caused illness or harm, even if it wasn't a magical curse? Could there be a scientific explanation for the feeling of unease, or even the actual ailments experienced by some? One popular theory revolved around ancient spores, fungi, or bacteria. Imagine a sealed environment, untouched for over 3,000 years. Inside that tomb, there were linen bandages, foodstuffs, dried flowers, and even the pharaoh's mummified body. These organic materials, along with the damp conditions that might have existed at times, could be a perfect breeding ground for microscopic life molds, fungi, and bacteria that thrive in dark, undisturbed places. If people were to enter such a sealed environment, breathe in the air, and disturb the dust, they could potentially inhale these ancient microbes. For someone with a compromised immune system, or even just someone sensitive to certain allergens, this could indeed cause respiratory problems, skin infections, or other allergic reactions. So, in theory, it wasn't a curse, but a very tiny, very old, and very biological hazard. A bit like discovering your grandmother's attic has a nasty mold problem, but on an ancient Egyptian scale. Another theory focused on toxic gases. When organic materials decay in a confined space, they can sometimes produce gases that are harmful to humans. Things like hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, or even carbon monoxide could build up over millennia. While these would likely dissipate quickly once a tomb was opened and exposed to fresh air, the initial rush of air upon entry could potentially expose excavators to dangerous levels, especially if they spent long periods in poorly ventilated chambers. It's the tomb's natural way of saying, please, step away from the ancient air. So, could these scientific explanations account for Lord Carnarvon's death or other illnesses? It's certainly more plausible than a supernatural curse. Carnarvon did die from an infection, and while a mosquito bite was the immediate trigger, a weakened immune system from breathing in ancient spores couldn't be entirely ruled out as a contributing factor. Similarly, some people might have experienced headaches, dizziness, or respiratory issues that were then attributed to the curse, but were actually mild reactions to ancient molds or gases. However, and this is a big however, there's very little concrete evidence to directly link these specific scientific dangers to the illnesses or deaths of the individuals associated with Tutankhamun's tomb. While the potential for such hazards exists in any ancient, sealed environment, the Curse of Tutankhamun was attributed to a wide range of ailments, many of which had clear, unrelated medical explanations. For example, for the ancient spores theory to hold up, you'd expect a higher incidence of specific types of lung infections or allergic reactions among the people who spent the most time in the tomb. Yet, as we saw with Howard Carter, the most exposed individual, he didn't suffer from any mysterious tomb-related illnesses. Many of the workers, who also spent long hours in the tomb, also lived perfectly healthy lives. Furthermore, ancient Egyptian tombs were often built in very dry desert environments, which isn't always conducive to the long-term survival and proliferation of all types of dangerous microbes. While some might exist, the idea of a lethal, widely spread tomb bug that specifically targeted only some people and conveniently left the chief excavator unscathed seems a bit far-fetched. So, while the scientific theories about molds, fungi, and gases are interesting and point to real potential dangers in some archaeological contexts, they don't really stand up as the grand explanation for the Curse of Tutankhamun. The primary driver of the curse narrative remained the dramatic deaths of a few individuals, amplified by the media, rather than a consistent pattern of illness caused by verifiable biological or chemical agents. Ultimately, the scientific theories serve to demystify the curse by offering rational alternatives to supernatural explanations. They remind us that the ancient world had its own practical dangers, independent of magic spells. But in the case of Tutankhamun, the real power behind the curse was less about hidden spores and more about the power of storytelling and human susceptibility to fear and fascination. It's a good lesson. Sometimes the truth, even the scientific truth, is a bit more mundane than the sensational story. A mosquito bite and a bacterial infection are far less thrilling than a pharaoh's vengeful spirit, or even a deadly ancient fungus. But understanding the difference is key to truly appreciating the remarkable achievement of archaeology, free from the shadows of fabricated fears. The real wonders of the tomb were far more tangible and far less threatening than any imagined curse. And it's those real wonders that we turn to next. Alright, we've taken a good, hard look at the Curse of Tutankhamun and politely shown it the door. It was a fun story, a great bit of sensationalism, but ultimately, it dissolved under the light of facts. Now that we've swept away the cobwebs of myth, let's finally turn our full attention to what truly made Tutankhamun's tomb one of the greatest archaeological finds of all time. The incredible, astonishing, truly wonderful things that lay within. This is where the real magic is, not in curses, but in history, art, and human ingenuity. Forget the scary stories for a moment. Imagine stepping back into that antechamber with Carter. In the flickering lamplight, what did they actually see? It wasn't just a random pile of stuff. It was a carefully curated collection of a pharaoh's worldly possessions, intended to accompany him into eternity. And it was pure gold, both literally and figuratively, for understanding ancient Egypt. First, let's talk about the sheer volume. The tomb contained over 5,000 objects. Think about that. 5,000 individual items, from tiny pieces of jewelry to massive sarcophagi, all crammed into relatively small chambers. It was like an ancient Egyptian Costco, but way more organized and with much better stuff. It took Carter and his team almost a decade to fully clear, catalog, and remove everything. And the artistry, oh, the artistry. The most famous piece, of course, is the golden death mask of Tutankhamun. It's made of solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, quartz, obsidian, and colored glass. It weighs over 22 pounds. Look at those serene eyes, the elaborate striped Nemes headdress, the cobra and vulture symbols protecting his brow. It's not just a mask. It's a portrait, an idealized image of a divine king, crafted with an exquisite skill that still amazes us today. Seeing it in person, you almost expect it to breathe. But it wasn't just the mask. The pharaoh's actual body was protected by 3 nesting coffins, the innermost one also made of solid gold, weighing even more. These coffins were placed within a massive quartzite sarcophagus, which itself was protected by 4 gilded wooden shrines, fitting one inside the other like a giant, very fancy set of Russian dolls. The craftsmanship involved in creating these perfectly fitting, monumental pieces is simply staggering. Imagine planning that out. Beyond the funerary items, the tomb offered a breathtaking glimpse into ancient Egyptian daily life, albeit a royal version of it. There were chariots, disassembled but perfectly preserved, their gilded surfaces still gleaming. We see Carter and his team working on one of the chariots, a truly enormous amount of intricate work. There were ornate thrones and stools, including a beautiful golden throne decorated with a scene of Tutankhamun and his queen, Ankhesenamun. Imagine having that in your living room. There were weapons, board games, clothing, linens, food provisions, and even a child's toy chest. It's like the king was getting ready for an eternal camping trip, fully stocked. These objects weren't just pretty. They were historical gold mines. They showed us the unparalleled skill of ancient Egyptian craftsmen and artists, their mastery of metalwork, carving, and inlay. They revealed details about religious practices, funeral rituals, and the elaborate preparations made for the afterlife. Before Tutankhamun's discovery, this particular period of Egyptian history, the late 18th dynasty, was somewhat murky. Tutankhamun himself was a relatively minor king, overshadowed by more powerful pharaohs. His father, Akhenaten, had caused a massive religious upheaval, trying to switch Egypt from worshipping many gods to just one sun god, Aten. Tutankhamun, who came after him, reversed these changes, bringing back the old gods. His tomb, therefore, gave us crucial insights into this tumultuous time, showing how the old traditions were quickly restored. It helped fill in massive gaps in our understanding of a vital period of transition. The sheer intactness of the tomb was what made it so unique. Almost all other royal tombs had been plundered in antiquity, their treasures stolen, their historical context lost. Tutankhamun's tomb, though it showed signs of two ancient break-ins, which were quickly sealed back up, was largely undisturbed. It was like finding an archaeological jackpot, a complete picture rather than just scattered puzzle pieces. So, when we talk about the wonderful things, we're not just talking about shiny gold. We're talking about the window it opened onto an entire civilization. The stories told by every bracelet, every statue, every painted wall. These objects allow us to connect with people who lived thousands of years ago, to understand their beliefs, their artistry, and their daily lives. They whisper secrets, not of curses, but of human creativity, devotion, and the timeless desire for immortality. The true wonder of Tutankhamun's tomb isn't in any imagined fear it created, but in the profound knowledge and breathtaking beauty it gifted to the world. It's a testament to a magnificent civilization and the meticulous work of archaeologists who, despite the hype, understood that the real treasure was the truth. And it is this truth, about a young king and his legacy, that continues to captivate us, far more than any curse ever could. We've talked about the incredible objects in Tutankhamun's tomb, how they showed us the unparalleled artistry of ancient Egypt. But what about the man himself? Who was Tutankhamun, this boy king, whose name became a household word, thanks to a careful archaeologist and a very busy press? His enduring story is far more fascinating than any curse, and it reveals a young life touched by both royal splendor and human frailty. Before Carter's discovery, Tutankhamun was a fairly minor figure in Egyptian history. His name didn't ring out like Ramses the Great or Hatshepsut. He was largely overlooked, a blip in the long timeline of pharaohs. But his intact tomb changed everything. Suddenly, this forgotten king was arguably the most famous pharaoh of all, and the treasures within allowed us to piece together a much richer picture of his life, his reign, and even his health. Tutankhamun came to the throne at a very young age, around 9 years old. Imagine being king when you're still playing with toys. He ruled for about a decade, dying mysteriously around the age of 18 or 19. His original name was Tutankhamun, meaning living image of Aten. This links him directly to his controversial father, Akhenaten, who, as we briefly mentioned, tried to switch Egypt to a monotheistic religion, worshipping only the sun god Aten. This was a radical change, shaking up thousands of years of tradition and causing a lot of unrest. When Tutankhamun took the throne, his advisors, since he was so young, gradually reversed his father's religious reforms. They brought back the worship of the old gods, like Ammonius, and restored the power of the traditional priesthood. This is when he changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Ammonius, symbolizing a return to the old ways. It must have been a huge political task for such a young ruler. So, even though he was young, his reign was incredibly important for stabilizing Egypt after a period of intense religious and political upheaval. The tomb gave us not just his belongings, but also his actual body. When Carter finally reached the innermost coffin and carefully unwrapped the mummy, it offered unprecedented insights into the pharaoh himself. This wasn't just ancient history, it was ancient forensics. For decades, the mummy has been a source of intense study. Early examinations revealed some interesting details. He was quite small, around 5 feet 6 inches tall. There was a wound on his skull, leading to early theories of murder or foul play. However, later, more sophisticated analyses using X-rays, CT scans, and even DNA testing have given us a much clearer and somewhat sadder picture of the young king. It turns out that Tutankhamun likely suffered from a number of health issues. DNA evidence suggests he was the son of Akhenaten and his own sister, which, while common practice in ancient Egyptian royalty to keep the bloodline pure, often led to genetic defects. Studies of his mummy revealed he likely had a clubfoot, making it difficult to walk without assistance. He had numerous walking sticks in his tomb, which seemed excessive until this discovery. He also probably suffered from malaria, a widespread disease in ancient Egypt. The wound on his skull was likely sustained after death during the mummification process, debunking the murder theory. The current leading theory about his death is that he likely died from complications of a broken leg, possibly exacerbated by his existing health problems and a severe bout of malaria. So, less of a dramatic assassination, and more of a tragic accident combined with genetic predispositions and ancient diseases. It makes him feel incredibly human, doesn't it? Not a god king, but a fragile young man, struggling with his health, trying to navigate a complex political world. This medical archaeology is one of the most incredible legacies of Tutankhamun's discovery. It allows us to use modern science to literally peer beneath the bandages of history. It helps us understand the realities of life and death, even for royalty thousands of years ago. It gives a face and a story not just to a pharaoh, but to a person. And that's the enduring power of Tutankhamun's tomb. It wasn't just about gold and jewels. It was about filling in the blanks of history for a pivotal era. It was about understanding the cultural and religious shifts of the Amarna period. And most powerfully, it was about connecting with a young man from the distant past, seeing his struggles, his physical challenges, and his ultimate fate. His tomb, therefore, isn't just a collection of artifacts. It's a deeply personal archive. It tells the story of a return to tradition, a life cut short, and the very human struggle against illness and mortality, even for those considered divine. It transformed a forgotten name into a vivid personality, making Tutankhamun not just a king on a throne, but a boy with a clubfoot, facing malaria, whose quiet legacy was brought to life by the careful hands of an archaeologist. And it's this human story, discovered through rigorous science, that truly stands the test of time, far outshining any fleeting tale of a curse. His story, in all its complexity, continues to teach us about both ancient Egypt and the timeless human experience. So, we've carefully picked apart the Curse of Tutankhamun, revealing it to be a concoction of unfortunate coincidences, eager journalism, and human imagination. We've seen the true, profound wonders of the tomb and learned about the very human life of the young pharaoh himself. Yet, despite all the facts, despite Howard Carter living a long life, the idea of the curse, or at least the allure of ancient mysteries, still hangs in the air, doesn't it? Why is that? Why do we, as humans, cling so tightly to sensational stories, even when the truth is far more complex and often, in its own way, more incredible? It boils down to a few very human reasons, actually. First, our brains are hardwired for stories, especially dramatic ones. Think about it. A calm, methodical report about carbon dating and pottery shards versus a tale of ancient spirits rising from the grave to take revenge. Which one gets your attention more quickly? Exactly. Drama sells, intrigue captivates, and a good mystery engages our imaginations in a way that dry facts sometimes struggle to do. Second, there's the sheer power of the unknown. Ancient Egypt, with its hieroglyphs, its mummies, its vast deserts, and its colossal monuments, naturally feels mysterious. It's so far removed from our daily lives that it almost seems like another planet. And when faced with such profound age and alien culture, our minds often fill in the blanks with the supernatural. It's easier, sometimes, to imagine a magical curse than to delve into the complex realities of ancient diseases, political intrigue, or meticulous excavation techniques. The unknown is both terrifying and utterly fascinating. Then there's the media's role, both then and now. In the 1920s, newspapers were battling for readership. A sensational headline about a pharaoh's curse meant more papers sold. Today, it might mean more clicks, more views, more viral content. The incentive to prioritize a gripping narrative over sober facts hasn't really changed. If anything, in our fast-paced information age, it's become even more pronounced. A nuanced explanation often gets lost in the noise, while a bold, dramatic claim cuts through. And let's be honest, there's a certain thrill in believing in something a little spooky. Isn't there? It adds a layer of excitement to life, a hint that perhaps the world isn't entirely rational or explainable. It's the same reason we love ghost stories around a campfire or watch horror movies. It's a safe way to experience fear and wonder. The Curse of Tutankhamun offers that thrilling chill without requiring us to actually face an angry pharaoh. Archaeology itself often finds itself in a double-edged sword situation because of this. Sensationalism does draw public attention to archaeological discoveries. It gets people interested in history who might not otherwise be. Millions of people around the world know the name Tutankhamun because of the curse, even if they don't know the actual historical significance of his reign. This public interest can lead to funding, museum visits, and a general appreciation for preserving the past. So it's not all bad. However, the downside is that it can profoundly distort public understanding. When the fantastical overshadows the factual, it can lead to misconceptions, perpetuate stereotypes, like the idea of vengeful savages, and devalue the rigorous, painstaking work that archaeologists actually do. It shifts the focus from learning and understanding to entertainment and fear. It can make archaeology seem like mere treasure hunting or a quest for spooky thrills, rather than a vital scientific and historical endeavor. So, as storytellers on a channel like this, we have a unique responsibility. Our job isn't just to tell you the amazing stories of history, but to tell them with care, with respect for the facts, and with a gentle nudge towards critical thinking. We want to entertain, yes, but also to inform, to show you that the truth, when you really look at it, is often far more fascinating and wondrous than any made-up tale. It's about appreciating the actual marvels, the incredible craftsmanship of the death mask, the intricate details of a chariot, the insights into a young king's health, rather than getting caught up in the imaginary specter of a curse. The real treasure of archaeology is the knowledge it unearths, the connections it builds between us and those who came before. The enduring allure of mystery will always be there. It's part of human nature to wonder, to speculate, to seek explanations for the unknown. But our strength lies in our ability to question, to seek evidence, and to appreciate the profound beauty of discovered truth. So, as we wrap up our journey through Tutankhamun's tomb, let's remember to always approach history with a sense of wonder, but also with a healthy dose of skepticism for the sensational. The quiet whispers of the past often hold more truth than the loudest shouts. And so, our quiet journey through the sands of time, through the Valley of the Kings, and into the famous tomb of Tutankhamun comes to a gentle close. We started by acknowledging the human love for sensation, that little spark inside us that gets excited by mystery and drama. We saw how this spark, combined with a bit of media frenzy and a dash of spiritualist theory, ignited the global phenomenon of the Curse of the Pharaohs following Lord Carnarvon's tragic but entirely natural death. We've carefully picked apart the sensationalism piece by piece. We looked at the supposed victims and found them to be simply people who, like all of us, eventually succumbed to illness or old age. We saw how Howard Carter, the man most guilty of disturbing the pharaoh, lived a long, full life, steadfastly dismissing the Tamirot of curses. We even explored the scientific theories about ancient microbes, finding them plausible as general risks but insufficient to explain a targeted, magical curse. What we're left with, after sweeping away the layers of myth and misunderstanding, is something far more profound and genuinely wonderful. The true treasure of Tutankhamun's tomb isn't found in any scary stories or supernatural phenomena. It's found in the unparalleled historical, artistic, and scientific insights it gifted to the world. Think back to those initial wonderful things that Carter glimpsed in the flickering candlelight. The gleaming golden mask, a masterpiece of ancient art, reflecting the idealized image of a king. The nested coffins and shrines, each a testament to incredible craftsmanship and meticulous preparation for the afterlife. The everyday objects like chariots, board games, and walking sticks that painted a vivid picture of a young ruler's life. These aren't just pretty trinkets. They are direct messages from a civilization long gone, speaking to us across millennia. The tomb taught us so much about the late 18th dynasty, about the turbulent religious reforms of Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun's crucial role in restoring stability. It showed us the beliefs, rituals, and daily lives of people thousands of years ago, giving them voices and faces we could never have known otherwise. It's a bridge built directly to the past, allowing us to walk through the corridors of time. And then there's the story of Tutankhamun himself. Through modern science, peering into his mummy, we learned about his youth, his royal lineage, his clubfoot, his struggles with malaria, and his ultimately human death. He ceased to be just a name on a cartouche and became a person, with his own joys and pains, his own challenges and triumphs, much like any of us. That connection, that feeling of understanding a life lived so long ago, is truly magical in its own right, without needing any supernatural embellishments. This is the quiet, enduring gift of the archaeologist. To uncover these truths, to carefully document them, to preserve them, and to present them to the world. It's a work of patience, precision, and profound respect for the past. Howard Carter's dedication, his refusal to be rushed by public demand, ensured that the true story of Tutankhamun's tomb, in all its complexity and beauty, could be properly told. He listened to the quiet whispers of history, even when the world was shouting about curses. So, as we drift away from the Valley of the Kings tonight, let's carry with us a renewed appreciation for the real, wonderful things archaeology unearths. Not the fleeting thrills of sensationalism, but the enduring richness of documented history, the breathtaking beauty of ancient art, and the very human stories that connect us to our ancestors. The past is always there, waiting to be discovered, patiently holding its secrets. It doesn't need curses to be fascinating. Its own truth is more than enough. All it asks is that we approach it with curiosity, with an open mind, and with a gentle willingness to separate the genuine awe of discovery from the noisy, often misleading, distractions of popular myth. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope you found peace and wonder in these quiet stories from the past. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with true historical treasures.